Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jona Colson, and I'm an educator and writer living in Washington, D.C. And I'm also the poetry editor of a new anthology called This Is What America Looks Like. And today, this reading and discussion will celebrate the LGBTQ plus writers of the new anthology, This Is What America Looks Like Poetry and Fiction from D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. This diverse, inclusive, and incisive anthology features works of poetry and fiction from 100 writers. The anthology is a creative response to America, and the poetry in this exciting anthology discusses issues that affect us in America now: the pandemic, political unrest, racial injustice, gender discrimination, and much more. So the writers will read from the anthology and offer discussion related to their work, queerness in the US, and its place in the American narrative now. So joining me today are Regie Cabico, Kim Roberts, Gregg Shapiro, and Venus Thrash. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you,
All of us
Jonah.
today.
Thanks for
This
having
wonderful
us.
celebration of saints and sinners, right? LGBTQ plus literary festival. So I would like to actually start with Gregg Shapiro. So Gregg lived in the Washington, D.C. neighborhoods of AU Park and Capitol Hill from 1985 to 1988. He's the author of 7 books. Entertainment journalist, poetry, fiction writer Shapiro now resides in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with his husband Rick and their dog Coco. So, Gregg, welcome.
Thank you, Jonah. Thanks for having me in the anthology as well.
Of course.
So I'm going to read the poem that's in the anthology. This is a poem titled Rent. The check is always, usually, sometimes, often late. Either the money's there or it's not. The amount fluctuates depending on what came in, what went out. Debt and death, fees and penalties are certainties. Shelter, less so. Dare I ask the daddy longlegs, the pill bugs, the silverfish and swarming ants, the centipedes and palmetto bugs to pay their share? What about the pale chameleon corpses that litter the ground beneath the desk of this office where the blinds are drawn from dawn to dark? Do they have rights? Do I? Renting time in this broken body, tenant and landlord, I can't tear myself away, rent the fabric like a dazed mourner, here until the next pogrom or plague, rate increase or revolution. And if I have a moment, can I read a second poem?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this is a poem called Quarantine, and it's in the fall 2020 issue of RFD magazine. Quarantine. By now you've heard, you've read, that quarantine comes from the Italian quarantena, meaning a period of 40 days, as if 40 days would ever be long enough to isolate to prevent the spread of COVID-19, as if most people, meaning Trump supporters, who aren't really people but deplorable vermin determined to bring about an apocalyptic event of biblical proportions, would have enough compassion for others to actually and respectfully follow, not obey, too loaded, such a request, not order, too governmental, for the sake and safety of the planet, for the sake and safety of their loved ones, the unwanted fetuses they can't imagine aborting, but will abandon once born, disrespected elders cut loose on ice floes in any season, bloody hands never come clean, no matter how much hand sanitizer is used, no matter how many times they scrub their tainted flesh while silently chanting happy birthday. Can they see through the cartoon dollar signs in their eyes, wipe away the silver dime tears streaming down their fevered cheeks during the kind of depression not even pharma can medicate? Quarantining people with AIDS, an idea floated by extremists, including Mike Huckabee, the bloated father of the disgraced Sarah in 1992, never gained ground. But that doesn't mean the conning conservatives haven't been trying to come up with dreadful schemes to eradicate anyone found lacking in their narrow worldview or unwilling to conform to their twisted and damning religious constructs. How easy it is to blame it on gay marriage, or drag queens reading books to children in public libraries, or children being raised in loving same-gender parent households. Blame it on anything but overpopulation, the systematic desecration of the earth. Do not think we will sit idly by this time either. We are far off thunder on a blue sky day. We are empty bellies rumbling in harmony, inching ever closing to blurring the solid lines between theirs and ours. We will act up in whatever way necessary, instruct the willing in mock funerals, the use of locks and human chains, mantras and slogans. We are survivors united, mourners who will never bend, never break, never forget the cost, make sure the toll is collected for lives lost then, now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Both of those poems, totally beautiful.
Thank you.
You mentioned, the title of that quarantine, right?
Quarantine, yes.
And then you said the definition for quarantine was 40 days. I had forgotten that. I think I knew that, but I had forgotten that. But I just recently learned who or what vaccine is derived from. Anybody know why it's called vaccine?
Something about cows, right?
Yes, because it used to come from a cow. The Latin for cow. I was like, strange, right? I didn't know that. Okay, thank you, Brooke. So, Greg, again, beautiful poems. I was just wondering, and maybe you could speak to what you feel the relationship to the first poem you read, which is included in the book called Rent. Maybe how is that relationship with the other topics or themes that you find in the book, or maybe why you decided to submit that poem to the anthology?
Yes, this question actually led me back to the poems that I submitted, one of which was also Quarantine. But of the three poems, Rent was written in the very early days of the pandemic, actually on December 30th, 2019. While the others were actually written, that I submitted, were written during COVID. But as you pointed out, I think it speaks to more than that. I think it speaks to the fragile and unstable lives many of us were leading under Trump as the end of his term was approaching. And on a personal note, as a freelance journalist, at a time when many in this profession are struggling to stay alive, it speaks to the constant fear I have of losing my livelihood and thereby my home.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know many of us share that. Absolutely. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
We'll come back to you for the discussion. My next reader will be Venus Thrash. So Venus is the author of the poetry collection, The Fateful Apple, which was nominated for the 2015 PEN Open Book Award. She has work forthcoming in Embodied, a feminist graphic poetry anthology, and the Other 100-Year House poetry anthology. So welcome, Venus.
Hi, Jonah. Thank you. I'm going to start off with the poem, one of the poems in the anthology. This poem is called Invisible Scars. Not hands clamped around.
Venus, I hate to say it, but you're kind of coming in and out with your audio.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I get closer?
Well, that's good. Is that better, guys? Okay.
Okay. How's that?
Good.
Okay. I'll just start at the top because they're going to edit that, I think.
Yes.
Okay. No visible scars. Not hands clamped around a throat. Liquor-fueled fists crushing the nose, blackening an already puffy eye. Not a knee to the gut, but There is a kind of violence that scars just the same, dampens joy, wounds the spirit, burdens the mind, suffocates the soul, a more subtle breaking of bones, a barrage of put downs, the backhanded compliment designed to degrade, withdrawing sex, rejecting intimacy, to hammer self-worth, to starve desire, to punish perceived wrongs, to recycle pain, to hurt when hurt.
Mm.
And I'm going to follow that up with twist it. This is what I hope of love. To find you wanting and unexpected as a breeze blowing kisses on the skin in the thick of summer. To be rendered nearly breathless when I hold your hand in mine. To long for me, even when I'm near and naked. Yes, to a walk in the park in misty rain, an arm around the waist without hiding, a bouquet of wild tiger lilies delivered by singing telegram in the middle of an ordinary day. Tears, safe enough to shed in your empathic grace. A scarlet dress fit for a harlot, lifted thigh high in a dark theater, a zipper undone, an eager crotch spooning, talking ourselves to sound sleep as the stairs to our room grow more impossible to climb, and that old silver moon forever slips from the late night sky.
Mm.
That's
What
it. Thank you.
a beautiful poem. What a beautiful love poem at the end.
Thank you.
Very different, in at least thematically, to the first one you read.
Yes.
Um, so maybe if I may ask about your first one, No Visible Scars. When did the poem surface? Was it specifically, in the past, in the most recent sort of Black Lives Movement um, uh, marches, or did it come earlier, or where do you feel is the origin of this poem?
Well, I know I wrote it last year, and you know, uh, and I mean, it didn't have to do with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I wasn't really sure where I was going with the piece when it first started, but I can tell you that one of the inspirations behind it was the book that came out, No Visible Bruises. I forget Kim, do you remember who the author of No Visible Bruises is? Anyway, anyway, so that was sort of the catalyst to get me kicking off to writing that piece. Having been in my own, abusive kind of relationship. So that No Visible Bruises book was and sort of like going to all this author's virtual events. I wish I could remember her name. Sort of sparked that poem. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I'm going to jump in and say it was Rachel Louise Snyder.
That's right.
May you.
That's right. And she was just really hitting all those spots. She was just in her talks and discussions, and so the poem was born out of that.
Thank you. And also, when you were reading that, I was kind of following along in the book with the first one, and the craft of that poem is so wonderful too. It's so tight. You hear the repetition, you hear, the infinitive, you hear the verb, and it just springs to life, as did Gregg's when he read it. That's what's so wonderful about hearing these, is that they take on such a wonderful life from the voice of the poet.
Mhm.
Venus.
Thank you.
Back to you. Okay, our next reader today is Kim Roberts. So Kim Roberts is the author of A Literary Guide to Washington, D.C., and 5 books of poems, most recently The Scientific Method from WordTech in 2017. She is the editor of By Broad Potomac's Shore, Great Poems from the Early Days of Our Nation's Capital, which was just published last year. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be in this group of poets, all of whom I know well and who have been personally just a huge influence on me and my work. So thanks so much, Jona, for bringing us together. Also for bringing us together in the pages of the anthology. That's a joy. So I'm going to read two poems. I have two poems in the anthology, but I wanted to read just one of them and read something else that's newer, if that's okay. So the poem from the anthology is called Little White Lies. There's a whole generation of American Jewish men named Stanley and Irving, my grandfather's generation. Ironically, their parents chose those names to sound American, by which they meant more patrician, more Christian. They wanted their sons, often the first in their families born on American soil, to fit in, to have better chances. But as soon as the Christian families understood the subterfuge, they jumped ship, and those names quickly turned from Gentile to Jewish. Stanley sounds like an adverb, and Irving like a gerund. Where have you been? Oh, I was just out Irving. What would the verb to erve mean? It's like the inside of a swerve, so I'd guess it means to prevaricate, as in thinking Jews could be just like them, as in by changing a name, we could become invisible. And then this newer poem that I wanted to read is a love poem. And it's a poem that sort of turns in on itself. Every line is used twice in sort of opposite order, so they meet in the middle. This is called Another Lapping Refrain. There's an ocean inside my belly, and you're making my tide rise. I want to apologize to the shore for my past indifference to its beauty. The curl of each wave tip imitates your lips. Between your breasts. My belly answers your lapping refrain with my own lapping refrain. Between your breasts, my belly nestles like a moon. The wave tip of your lips is indifferent to its own beauty. I want to apologize to the shore, but you're making my tide rise inside the ocean in my belly.
Another beautiful love poem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Again, both poems totally great, and hearing that new work is wonderful. If maybe you could just speak to the first poem just a little bit, because that's the one I know, from the anthology. What, I guess we could all guess the origin, people changing names when they arrive to a different country to sound more, here in this case, more American. Do you feel like, well, maybe you can speak a little bit to the origin of that, but also, do you think that still happens?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. People are changing names and trying the best they can to pass. The history of that in my family is written right into my last name. Roberts, obviously not a Jewish last name. So a couple of generations ago, family members made the decision to take a name that was Lithuanian and turn it into something that sounded sort of blandly American. Family members also chose to give up a lot of the Jewish religious traditions, cultural traditions, even foodways, and to try as best they could to take advantage of education and job opportunities that otherwise they felt would have been closed to them. But it's really difficult to have a last name that is a record of internalized anti-Semitism, to carry that on. And I've actually at various times thought about taking the original last name back, but I've, you know, that also feels a little false. It's not the name that I had recognized as my own, and now I've published too much under Roberts. But I, you know, it's something that I have struggled with at various times.
Yeah. In a similar way, I teach students who are non-native speakers, and very often, you know, they have these beautiful, wonderful names that are difficult for me to pronounce as an American native English speaker. But then they tell me, "Oh, just call me Peter."
Yeah, right.
Or, you know, "Oh, just call me Sam." It's like, no, what's your name? Keep saying it until I get it right. That's my responsibility, right? So in some ways, I don't want them to feel like they can't use their beautiful names, but they want to change it to make it easier and you know, an act of assimilation into the, you know, American classroom.
Right.
Thank you, Kim. We'll be back. Next up is Regie Cabico. And let me tell you a little bit about Reggie. So Reggie is a spoken word pioneer, having won the Norwegian Poets Cafe Grand Slam and taking top prizes in 3 national poetry slams. Television credits include HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam, TEDx Talk, NPR's Snap Judgment. He is a publisher of Capturing Fire Press and resides in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Reggie.
Hey, Jona, how are you?
Good.
I'm so excited to be here with incredible poets. This is my Saints and Sinners debut, so I'm really honored that I can be here with all of you and to be in this phenomenal anthology. I'm going to read my poem in the book, but I'm also going to read another poem in the book. And it was really hard to choose because they're just incredible poems. And there's like any number of dozens that I could choose from. But I think in this particular moment, I'm going to read Laura Chauvin's poem, There Must Be a Gate. Where there is a wall, there must be a gate, a way to enter the garden on the other side. Birds need no permission to migrate overhead. Moles tunnel the earth to get through. For them, brick and concrete are inconsequential, barbed wire, a human concern. We must pass through the gap, if one exists, wingless, clawless, on the same 2 feet that carried us days and miles to reach this wall. Identity, vouchers, and proof of public education are sewn into our pockets. There must be a gate, we tell ourselves. We have seen this wall before. That was There Must Be a Gate by Laura Chauvin. And I'm going to read my poem in the anthology, and I'm so glad this got published. I never thought this would ever be published because I would perform it in open mics and I would have different versions of it. And I just thank you for the opportunity to send this poem out there and to get the final line breaks into the way that it should look. Asian in the Sun. Oh, and everything is true in the poem. Asian in the Sun. I was named after a plumbing service in Baltimore. Reggie sounded like my father's name, Reynaldo, ray of light, ruler and counselor. At 3, I listened to Disney records, memorized all the stories of princesses and wicked stepmothers. Mall shoppers threw money at me. At 5, I was lost in a grocery store and could not find my father, so I walked all the way home. To this day, I have an excellent sense of direction. At 11, I knew that I'd be an entertainer, recited the Christmas gospel with so much emotion, the nuns wept. At 16, I knew I had to go to New York if I was going to be an actor, never knowing that I'd never be Asian enough for the industry. By the time I was 23, my family lost their home, evicted, their furniture left on the street, and I wrote my first poem. My family scattered like so many pieces of shattered glass on an island I've stepped on. 5 years ago, my awards and certificates were given to me in a cardboard box. I threw them all away in the dumpster when I moved to Mount Pleasant. I survived the American dream, deferred, in the loss of a mother who thought Lady Liberty would be this beach she saw watching Hollywood films. Today, I lose myself in poetry on stage, always trying to hold myself together, finding my way home.
Thank you, Reggie.
Thank you.
I love this poem. I love all these poems. Well, I was gonna sort of maybe ask about how much of that poem, the second one you read, Asian in the Sun, is biographical, but you kind of just told us. So maybe you could talk about briefly how you consider how a poet, any of us could speak to this, making something so private public. And so how do you negotiate putting the private self into sort of a poem that someone else is going to read? Do you feel like is there any hesitation, or do you use the language and the craft to as sort of like a funnel to pass through to reach the reader?
I just had to be really old enough for all of this to be processed. And I think just as a slam poet, you have 3 minutes to put your whole life in a poem. So how do you do that? So taking these up against the wall moments in my life and looking at the pivotal ages of 3, 5, 11, 16, 23, and so forth became the base. There's some things I never thought about, things that I sublimated. I grew up in a dysfunctional household. So with all that trauma, you just sort of take that all in. And I think at a certain point, these are all up against the wall moments. And I think the thing about throwing all of your things away, and Kim, you were there when I was throwing all of my stuff away, awards and certificates, because what does it all mean? And those things are in me. And at least I have this poem that has those awards and certificates. So some of those poems are a way to remember. And, while the poem has a lot of difficult images, it's life, right? And so that's what we try to do as poets, try to share that. And so it was personal, and I would perform it in open mics, not knowing what its true impact was. And so I'm just happy that it's out there. So I just can't thank you enough. But again, my...
Uh-oh, Reggie. Reggie froze for a second. Maybe he'll come back. Should I wait? He'll come back. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Maybe I'll pop back in. Hopefully Reggie will come back. We have to log back in. Reggie, come back to us.
Jona, you're kind of your mic is kind of low too.
It is. Can you guys hear me? I'll talk loud.
I hear you now. I definitely hear you. It's
okay. So where should we pick up?
Oh.
Well, I guess you were just talking about slam poets. So talk about the slam.
Yeah. So yeah, you're trying to put your whole life in a poem. So how do you do that, right? And so I sort of structured it in I call them story haikus or story nuggets. So each section it's like its own beginning, middle, and end. So it was that was sort of the way I crafted that. But also, Asian in the Sun is a title for a play I wanted to write that I never wrote, and so I wanted to use that title. And so yes, definitely a nod to Langston Hughes. And I think the American dream It just means so much. And for Filipinos, we worship American culture. Like whenever there's a We Are the World, every Filipino has to dress up as each of the We Are the World singers, and they do their own We Are the World. So that's how much America is idolized. And so, but they don't tell you what the reality is. And I also think now with a lot of the anti-Asian violence that's happening because of the coronavirus, the poem has even more impact, and for immigrants as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna all these poems, sort of be ranged from immigration, identity, love, family, domestic violence, economic concerns, and they're just so wonderful to hear because they all begin to sort of funnel into this idea of the American narrative, and in some ways, sort of the American dream, whether or not we believe in the American dream, or if it's real or tangible, or just sort of a myth. So maybe, if you don't mind me throwing this question out to you, do you feel like maybe in your writing that you're writing back in some ways to those who have been written out of the American dream, or that you're writing back to something that's been left out of a narrative in American letters, or just in American poetry?
Well, all I know is that the Filipino experience was not present growing up in Clinton, Maryland. I never saw Filipino people on TV or Filipino singers. This has all changed, and I'm happy I get to see amazing Filipino artists, writers, actors, playwrights. But I just wanted my Filipino experience to be documented and to make sense of it. And I think that this is what the poem does. It helps me understand what was it all about. And I'm still trying to answer that question, right? Constantly. I think, who am I and who am I now? And I thought all of my identity poems of the 90s were all done with. But then because of the administration that we're in, speaking now not just for my own identity, but for so many people who are disenfranchised, for trans folks and undocumented immigrants and so on. So to me, that's all really important. And I also applaud you because you're also teaching students that are English language learners, and I also work in elementary schools. So I hear their stories, and it's important to, and I tell them, write your poems now, kids, because if you don't write your story, someone else will write it for you. So speak up. Let's get, who are the girls? Come on, let's speak. It's a new century. So I definitely try to advocate for that.
Yeah, great. No, absolutely. And maybe I'll just add on to that. If you feel like you're writing back to an American narrative that's been left out from the story, or do you write about your own sort of queerness, your LGBTQ identity? I find I've never written about that in my work. I don't know, Venus, have you written about any of that? Like sort of being, trying to work into the fabric of what we call sort of American narrative, or have you written about your sexuality or queerness in any of your poems?
Of course, I mean, all the time. It's just a part of being a poet, and it's a part of being Black and in America, and female, and so it's just it can't be separated from, I suppose, my poetry. That the anthology that you mentioned when you introduced me, Embodied, has a very strong sexual poem in that anthology, and um, the poem itself is not something that I usually write in terms of the sex involved, but that's there. So it's all there. Of course, I write about being Black uh, and all that means in America, and that means a lot. And it was interesting listening to Kim, because I've always wondered about Kim's last name, and I've always wondered you know, the Jewish part and stuff like that. So it was really interesting to hear her go into that and talk about that. It fulfilled some of my wildest musings about Kim's name. So it was great.
Greg, what do you think?
Oh
You can
boy.
answer any or all of that question.
Well, I feel like at this point, it's all gay all the time. My day job is I'm an entertainment journalist for more than a dozen regional LGBTQ outlets. I've been writing very much gay poetry since I first started writing, and my new book, which came out last Thursday, is a book of short stories that is so gay it should just have its own rainbow flag. I mean, it's pretty gay. So yeah, I mean, it's who I am. It's what I write about, and I write about it because I want to reach LGBTQ readers, but I also want to reach straight readers. I want to reach every reader so that they know more about the gay experience.
Yeah. Kim, what do you think?
Well, I have to say that, you know, some of the most important writers in my life have been queer writers who have really influenced how I think and how I write. And I think Jona, what you were saying about reclaiming history or writing ourselves into history really resonates for me. You know, as Reggie pointed out, if you're not seeing yourself represented, it's like you have just been erased. It's like your experience is not valued and not valuable. And so I am just indebted to this range of writers. I mean, you know, I would say Walt Whitman, Gertrude Stein, Elizabeth Bishop, June Jordan, I'm trying to think, Marilyn Hacker, Adrienne Rich. These were writers who just have been instrumental to me. I also do a lot of research into the literary history of the greater Washington, D.C. region. And so many queer writers like Natalie Clifford Barney, Alice Dunbar Nelson, Angela Weld Grimke, Essex Hempel, you know, there are people who have been such a huge part of the city's literary, and of course, Walt Whitman, of the city's literary history. And so the opportunity to go back and look at that work and find ways to answer back to those writers in my contemporary work is just, it feels like such an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And to riff off that, I have about maybe 2 more questions I'd like to ask you guys. I remember the first, what I felt, at least knowingly, that I went to read gay author was E.M. Foster's Maurice. And I was an undergrad when I read that, and it's very sort of abstract, right? He couldn't like come out and say more explicit detail things, and just kind of like and they went into the room together, kind of thing. It's very, but even just knowing it was there, I think Kim, what you said, it made me feel like, wow, I'm included some ways. Still discovering my sexuality and identity, but you're like, wow, I feel included here. So maybe Kim said some of her authors. What are some other authors that maybe queer authors that you read for the first time knowing they were queer, or maybe even reading the experience in the work and made you feel like, wow, there's part of an identity here that I relate to, or a theme? Can you remember any writers that kind of popped and made you say, ah? that you've been reading?
Andrew Holleran, for me, because I'm clearly the oldest in the room, way back when I was really young, when his first novel came out, it was it was really, really important, very influential, and everything he's written since has been very important. But that's prose, not poetry. But for me, it was Andrew Holleran.
So, Dancer from the Dance?
That was the first. Yeah, that was the first book he wrote. Yeah.
Did that come out in the late 70s or early 80s?
Yes, 78 or 79, I believe.
Yeah, that was.
I was only 5, but no, I'm just kidding.
No, definitely, that's a subliminal work in American letters. Venus, any authors that?
I was thinking, because my parent, I grew up in the South. My parents were very strict on me. They had a tight leash on me, and the only place I was allowed to go on my own was the library. So I remember, being, 15, 16, just like I needed to find something that was matching what I was thinking and feeling in terms of my sexuality. And I came across a book. Kim, you're gonna love this. I came across a book called The Well of Loneliness.
Oh.
Cliff Hall.
And I read it cover to cover. It's one of those tragic lesbian love story type books, but the funny thing about it is that I really clung to it anyway. I really devoured the story, and that was probably one of the first reads I ever did, in terms of LGBTQ lit, which I'm so glad that the lit has grown. I'm so glad that, it's not these tragedies, these overwhelming tragedies. And just, the title alone is enough to just make you play some sort of violin or something. So I'm so glad it's grown. And Kim named so many of the authors that I admire, like Alice Dunbar Nelson and Angelina Wilkin Kay and Lorraine Hansberry, of course, and just and those are the people that I have turned to in the past.
And when Kim mentioned when I first read Whitman, I didn't know he was.
Yeah, me either.
I was like, oh, blah, blah. But then when you learn, you come back with a difference of different pair of eyes, right?
You do read it, yeah.
Yeah, you read it differently when you.
Yeah.
I'm sure many authors you all read and didn't know, their orientation. Reggie, any that stick out to you?
Yeah, I need to write the gay Filipino well of loneliness. I should have written that. I feel like I've lived that for decades. Wow. Can't wait to see that movie, Venus.
Right.
But it goes to show you that I was influenced in the early 90s, and so the multicultural literature boom was happening. So I was reading every anthology. There were Black erotic anthologies and Asian anthologies, and I think Essex Hempel definitely spoke to me just for that passion and the audacity and the eroticism and just the bravery of his work. But it goes to show you that I was also interested in trying to add some humor to the gay canon as well. So certainly there's all of the tragic stories, and I'm just trying to think of some of the comedic queer poets in the early slam world. No one is coming to mind, but certainly all of the writers like Essex Hempel, and also some of the non-queer poets, the women of color like Sandra Cisneros, and all the poets that I saw at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe at the time really influenced me. Miguel Algarin, who passed away, who founded the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. I wouldn't say that he's an influence, but he really gave this open mic platform for poetry slam, and that's where I was influenced from. And there's a book coming out called something about the queer Nuyorican history. So certainly that space was influential for me as well. So.
I think
Oh, and I want to say one thing, that in that time, early 90s, I had to make a choice. Am I going to come out now? Or I could stay a closeted poet. And so it wasn't like I didn't have the privilege that young poets have where they can just be whatever they want to be. It was like, okay, I'm going to be a gay poet now, and I'm going to out myself, and these poems that I'm going to read are going to be gay, and it's just going to be in your face, and I'm going to just do it. And so that's what it was at the time. So yeah, so thank you for making me remember that.
I also, oddly enough, I turned to, I know she's not queer, I don't think, Anne Rice and the Vampires. I turned to vampires too, because, you know, it wasn't, or like gothic literature, but it was, you know, it was kind of hidden underneath, you know, like the gayness was here with a metaphoric representation of some form of monstrosity, which of course that's another panel. But
she has a gay son.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, yeah, and but you know, I really turned to that. So maybe sort of one more question to take around here. I know, Gregg, you'd spoken about the queer literature maybe being published now, and this would be a question for all of us. We could open this up, but how do you how palpable does queer publishing, you know, LGBTQ plus publishing, LGBTQ plus books, how important is the engine of, you know, Lambda literary, and how do we feel that there is sort of that push and still that really robust LGBTQ press and books?
I think in the same way that we still need gay and lesbian film festivals, gay and lesbian publications, that sort of thing. It's ultimately it's about representation. And while there are more and more books being written by straight people, being well written by straight people, I mean, I think the best example right now for the last couple of years is a book called The Great Believers, which is a novel by Rebecca Mackay, who is a straight woman who wrote possibly the best gay novel of the last 5 years. But for us, we still need to have, you know, represent ourselves. And as a journalist, I'm getting there's still gay content out there. It might be harder to find, especially during a pandemic, but it's coming from more independent artists, independent musicians, independent writers, independent filmmakers. So it's a little harder to find. It's still there, and I still think that kind of representation is essential.
Right. I remember when I first moved here to DC, I could just walk into Lambda Rising bookstore,
oh, yeah.
lesbian bookstore. I was like, oh, you know, here's everything. But now it's that's gone, and so it's
gone.
Under, you know. Anyone else? What do you think? I don't know. What do you guys think about sort of the gay? Do you feel like there's like a lot of? Are we picking up lots of gay literature still, or it's not as? How do you feel it's working into the overall publishing world of?
I would like to see more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I certainly would like to see more of it coming from, you know, my particular stripe or tribe or whatever you want to call it. It's just not out there. And the I guess the funny thing about it is that in terms of my prose or fiction, I don't really write a lot about LGBTQ. And so you know, I don't know why it's you know, not out there as prominently maybe as it used to be.
Do you think that speaks to like an overall acceptance of queerness, of queer lit in American literature?
I mean, in some ways, yes. I mean, there is a deeper understanding and acceptance. But sometimes when I see certain groups left out of that, I sometimes wonder if it's a certain kind of silencing as well. So it just, I don't know, it's just, and maybe it's just the way the wind's blowing at the time. Who really knows all the reasons why?
Right.
Um,
I was very happy
I
when
just beg your pardon?
I was very happy when Jericho Brown, gay Black poet, won the Pulitzer Prize last year.
He
So
did, and I think that speaks to what I was saying about silencing. I mean, I think Black gay men are really the hot item right now, because I think of these brilliant poets like Jericho and like Dinesh and like Phil Williams and Justin, can't think of his last name, and they're all very prominent and they're all Black gay men. And I think that's that's the flavor. That's the flavor right now. So
what was the
that's
flavor before?
probably white gay men. I don't know, Jonah. I mean,
No, because that's really curious that maybe it's kind of. But you're right. I mean, the way the wind blows and the ways in which different people
yeah.
take their stage in the literary world, and with minority representation. Reggie, we're gonna say something.
Yeah, well, I produced Capturing Fire, which is an international queer spoken word slam. It's about 10 years old now, and I never wanted to publish books. It was not a goal of mine. But, the next Black male poet is Micah the Poet. Capturing Fire Press. We have, there are spoken word poets that need to be published, that have audiences that want to buy their books. Micah is a regional poet from DC. So Capturing Fire Press, we've published about 5 authors now. And so we can't have too many queer presses. And so there are always there were numerous voices that need to be, that have audiences that presses aren't looking for. And it's not necessarily going through an academic train or highway. There are so many poets, and so I'm happy to be able to publish those voices in the press. And I think DC needs it, and so I think that's really important. We can't have too many presses, but when you're talking about presses and record labels and theater companies, they're all kind of, the theater companies are falling apart. They're struggling now, especially during the pandemic. So I feel even the bars, there's no such thing now as a queer bar or a lesbian bar or a gay bar. That's all gone. And so I don't know what we are going to actually get, but only in publishing can you still work through a pandemic. And it's only through books where that at the bookstore, I live next to Politics and Prose, right? So I'm able to get new information in a bookstore, but all of the other information, it's very hard to get. So literature and poetry will hold us up.
Yes, I agree. Kim, any thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree with Reggie that there's no such thing as too many presses, and I think the health of a community is reflected in a sort of having that range, and so we need to have Jericho Brown winning the Pulitzer Prize for poetry as much as we need to have small regional presses that are publishing works by people who otherwise would never get published. I think of many of the younger trans poets who are just now beginning to be published. Those are voices that I never heard just even a couple of decades ago. I feel like while we really do need to press for the kind of representation that comes with big awards and recognition, up to the level of the U.S. Poet Laureate and et cetera, that it's also just as important to have these lesser known voices find homes in journals and small presses. And I think anthologies do a huge amount of heavy lifting in that way. It is the way that we discover so many people who we didn't even know were part of our community. So again, I say congratulations, Jona, for this huge contribution that you made with anthology. It really, it was an honor to be in there with people who I knew, whose names I recognized, but also to find these new voices. It's invaluable.
Thank you very much. So on that, well said. Thank you all. Thank you to all the wonderful poets. I really appreciate you, each of you, and your contributions to this book and beyond, and all of your beautiful, wonderful poems, and for the discussion. So please consider picking up a copy of this book. It's available at your favorite bookseller. It's available through the bookstore with Saints and Sinners. And also you can go right through the Washington Writers Publishing House website. And please check out all these poets. They have all their wonderful books and works and anthologies. And yeah, and thank you so much to again to the poets and to Saints and Sinners Literary Festival, and to Paul Wills and Tracy Cunningham for all of their work on this festival. And it's been an absolute pleasure, poets. So thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks,
Greg,
Jona.
Reggie.
Thank you, Jona.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. It was good to hang with you.
Absolutely. And everyone, please enjoy the rest of the festival. We're all looking forward to it. So guys, thank you so much.